Now, most of you watching this probably don't even know what a Kamen Rider is. So before we even talk about Build, let's give a little crash course on Kamen Rider. Now, if you think about Power Rangers, did you know that Power Rangers is actually a show in a massive genre called tokusatsu that has other shows in Japan that's not really well known here in the West, like Kamen Rider or Ultraman. And essentially these shows are people that then transform into superheroes using some sort of transformation device. In the case of Kamen Rider, it's usually their driver or some type of belt. Now, Kamen Rider is split up into 3 eras: the Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa era. Basically, each era is just an era of Kamen Rider. The Showa era being the original Kamen Rider up there, all the way up to the 90s, essentially. And then the Heisei era, probably the most popular era of Kamen Rider, was from 2000 with Kuga all the way to 2018 with Gio. And then currently, we're in the Reiwa era, with the first Kamen Rider series being 01. And if I'm correct, each era is based on the emperor in Japan at the time. So Build is actually the Kamen Rider for 2017 and the second to last Kamen Rider in the Heisei era. And essentially, I wasn't really into Kamen Rider or Power Rangers at all, but my cousin was really into it, and so it kind of interested me. And I basically decided to just go on Google, look at a bunch of images of the different Kamen Riders, and then just pick whichever one is the most interesting to me. Because like Power Rangers, each season of Kamen Rider usually doesn't have anything to do with the previous seasons. So you can start with Build, like how I did, and not know nothing about Kamen Rider. That's because each season starts with basically a brand new cast of characters and setting and story and whatnot. Basically a whole new world. There are crossover movies in between the Kamen Rider that link them, but you don't really need to know any previous information about Kamen Rider for whatever season you're watching. Now, there is an exception, that being anniversary seasons, where the entire point of the Kamen Rider is that they can transform into previous Kamen Riders, in which case then you probably want to watch the previous Kamen Riders to understand that one. But for this one, you don't have to. Build is pretty much set in its own story and world and its characters and whatnot. And I watched it, and I loved it. And so that's why we're going to be talking about the toys today. And this right here is Build Driver, or the Build Driver. It is basically Sento, who's his actual name's belt that he wears to transform into Build. And since Build came out in the second half of Heisei, commonly known as the Neo Heisei or Heisei Phase 2, this right here is when Kamen Rider was really a lot about selling toys, and so Build had a bunch of forms, probably the most forms out of any other Kamen Rider, I think. And what that basically means is more toys to sell. And this year's gimmick was bottles, more well known as full bottles. So essentially, he would put the bottles into this belt, he would crank this little thing, and then he would transform into Build. And a big gimmick of this driver is that there were a bunch of different bottles he could collect, as you can see here. And basically, 2 of them were a best match, or what 2 would go together. And throughout the series, kind of, Build would collect these bottles and then find the combinations that work and then transform into that best match. You can also transform into combinations that aren't best matches, but the best matches were basically more powerful. And better than me explain it, here we have done a fateful and high budget recreation of a henshin scene from Kamen Rider Build. By the way, henshin is their transform. It's Japanese for transform. Yeah. Sorry, bub, but I need my weekly power-up, so you gotta go. the wrong one. Henshin. Well, this isn't right. Wow. It's just like the show. And now that you have a little bit more of an understanding of the build driver, which is what we're going to be talking about mostly today, we can now talk about this. The belt strap, which is meant for a little kid. And I'm not a little kid, so what I had to do was I basically used some electrical tape to lengthen it. And it looks okay. It's black, so kind of works. And essentially you got these two straps here, you can see here, that you then attach onto the driver like so. And then you attach the other one here, and now you can wear it and pretend to be Build. Here too is accessory for the Build driver, which is a bottle holder. So it can hold 3 bottles. You can see here it just comes out, comes in. You can just clip it onto the belt like that, and now you can walk around with 3 extra bottles, which I kind of wish it was 4, because you need 2 to get a best match, and this one gives you 3. So that's kind of weird. But I mean, it could also be because some bottles have multiple best matches. We can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I guess you're also supposed to buy 2 of these, so have it on both sides, so you have 6 in total. Yeah, I don't know. So now let's talk a little bit more about the bottles, or I should say full bottles. These are what give Build his power-ups essentially, and they have a little cap on top that you can unscrew and screw back in. It doesn't really do anything in terms of features, but the main feature of these full bottles is that you can shake them, and when you do, you get this little cranking sound. Now this right here is Rabbit, whose best match is Tank. These two make Build's base form, Rabbit Tank. And so, you know, he shakes it like this. Normally the caps are closed like this, and then he would then single-handedly open each one, and then you saw the skit. You saw the skit. Now, one thing I want to talk about too is that for most of the full bottles, if you look at the cap, there's a sticker on there that tells you the initials of the best match. In this case, this is the Rabbit bottle, and then the T stands for the Tank bottle. And yeah, I think they're pretty cool. Now, they are made out of clear plastic, so you can actually see what's inside of them. And, I mean, they look really nice, and if you have a bunch of them, they really look great all together. Really good collectible item. Now, if we talk a bit more about the Build driver, it's definitely not something you would wear as a fashion piece. I don't know, maybe you could, but it definitely looks more like a toy, which is what it's supposed to be. As you can see. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that on the back of the bottles, you can see all these little spikes that are coming out. This actually interacts with the Build driver and is what allows the Build driver to detect which bottle you're using. Now, as you can see, the side of the Build driver has a little crank that Sento would then crank when he finds the best match or whatever bottle he puts in here, and then that would make him transform into Build. And on the back, you have the switch. Now, there's an on and off switch, and when you turn it on, you get the sound effect that would play when Build attaches the driver onto his waist. This is also where you can find the battery compartment, which, just a quick note, there's a little kind of like peg or button that's sticking out that you need to stick a really thin object through to actually unlock it and to be able to take off the battery cover and attach batteries. And then on the back here, you can see a little bit closer where the straps actually go. And I have to say, this toy looks pretty darn accurate to the actual Build driver in the show. And I mean, it looks great. You got these little gears at the bottom here. You got this massive wheel with a gear inside. There's the Build logo right there. And it just looks really cool and mechanical and techy and stuff, you know. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm also very biased because I love Build. Now, this is a used copy, so do keep in mind there's probably some scratches and whatnot on it. And here is where the bottles would go when you place them into the Build driver, with all these little notches that read the little spikes on the back of the bottles. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that usually a best match between two full bottles is an organic bottle and an inorganic bottle. Or the show calls it, I think, biotic and abiotic. What that really means is like it's a living being and then an inanimate object. So in this case, it would be rabbit and tank. Now, in the show, Bill would always put the biotic bottles on the right side and then the abiotic bottles on the left side. However, in the toy, you can put it in any order and you'll get the same sound effects. And now that you have transformed into Build, at least in your imagination, whenever you spin the crank while transformed, that is, you will get the Vortex finish. Unfortunately, it is just a generic Vortex finish sound effect for all of the best matches. There isn't a unique one for each of them. Now that you have successfully defeated the monster of the week, you can de-transform. And when you take out the bottles from the driver, it makes the removing bottles sound effect, I guess. Yeah. Now, if you put two bottles that aren't a best match, you will get a generic transformation jingle. And this same sound effect plays if you put only one bottle into the driver. And so I'll show you another best match, that being to call Gatling, and then I'll take out Gatling and put in Tank to show you what a non-best match transformation sounds like. For a non-best match, when you spin the crank again, you get the Vortex attack, which is pretty similar to the Vortex finish, aside from name. And then one really cool thing about the driver is that in the show, Bill usually does what he calls build up, which is when he's already transformed and then he changes forms while in a form. And the toy can actually replicate that because it actually remembers what bottles you put into the driver. So if you put two bottles and then you take one out and put another bottle in, it still remembers the bottle that was left in there. And as shown here, we have a generic non-best match, and then I'm going to take out Tank and put in Phoenix's best match, that being Robot, and you can see that I didn't have to reset Phoenix by taking it in and out again to get the best match sound effect for Phoenix Robot. Now, one really cool thing about these bottles is that inside of the bottles, they have a plastic block, essentially, that allows you to make the clanking noise. But it also allows you, once you put them into the build driver and then crank the lever, it actually moves the liquid up and down to basically motion like liquid moving around in the build driver, which is really cool. However, there are different versions of these bottles. Now, what you see on screen right now are two versions of the Gatling full bottle. One of them on your left is the DX version, and the one on the right is actually either a candy toy or a gachapon version. To my knowledge, there are basically three main versions of the full bottles. One is the DX version, so this is the normal toy version that comes with all the features. And then the candy toys and the gachapons are basically cheaper versions of them. The candy toy comes with a piece of candy, and the gachapon comes in those coin vending machines. The main difference between DX versions and non-DX versions is that the DX version has that peg that allows the bottle to move up and down when you're spinning the crank on the driver. However, between the candy toy and the gachapons, I can't really tell the difference between those two. Aside from that, another difference from a DX toy to a non-DX toy is that there might be some slight color differences. But aside from that, the sound effects that both play are the same. But what's really cool is that normally with Kamen Rider, even though normally it's not canon, they normally have like a secondary toy line, like a Legend Rider line, which is normally like you have the main toy line, which is like gimmicks from the actual show, but then there's gimmicks that relate to previous riders from previous seasons. And in this case with Build, what's really unique is normally previous versions of this thing, it's like the face of a Kamen Rider on the whatever the gear's gimmick is, and then that would make the sound effects for that original Kamen Rider. For Build, while he does also have the ones where it's just a picture of the Kamen Rider on the toy, he also has attributes or like secret codes, essentially, where the Build toy line would take two attributes of a previous Kamen Rider and make that kind of like a secret best match. So an example would be with Taka. As we know, the best match for Taka is Gatling. However, if you have the metal bottle, if you put both of them together, you get the Kamen Rider O's sound effect. And then you also have bottles like Doctor and Gamer, which gives you the previous year's Kamen Rider X-Aid. Another cool bottle I have in my collection is this Super Sentai bottle, whose best match is a Kamen Rider bottle, which I don't have, unfortunately. But I still think it's really cool that they had this crossover toy with Super Sentai. And then another thing is with the gachapon, you can actually get these like rare versions of bottles. So here I have a metallic version of the tank bottle, which I think looks amazing. Looks really nice. And the bottle can still make that clinking noise if you shake it. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that the designs on the bottles are sometimes hard to see because it's clear plastic, but later on they ended up painting the images on them so that they were easier to see. So that was really nice. And so now it is time for my overall thoughts on the Kamen Rider Build toys, or at least the ones that I have. I definitely don't have all of them, and there's a lot more, but for the most part, this video is just going to be about the Build driver and the full bottle, so the main gimmick of Build. So one thing you might all be wondering is what's going on with the screen right now, and I originally did film a original version of the overall thoughts, but I ended up not really liking it, and so I'm redoing it with this voiceover, and that's why you're going to be seeing mini me over here on screen talking, or at least it's me talking, but then the little guy on the screen is emoting for me. Yeah. Anyway, now the Build driver. I gotta say, I really like it a lot. I haven't really gotten a lot of role-playing toys just because that's not really the thing I enjoy. I really enjoy collecting like action figures or like Legos and other things. And for the most part, I don't really buy like electrical toys. It's always never been my thing. But after watching Kamen Rider Build and just loving it so much, I really wanted the Build driver. And I gotta say, now that I have it and I've been messing around with it, it is a lot of fun to switch out the bottles and play the different sound effects, and then the light goes off. And spinning the crank is really satisfying. It's almost like a expensiver version of a fidget toy, but it's a very nice fidget toy, and then you can also pretend to be the Build like in the show. And I think what's really great about these toys is that they're really accurate to the show, which is something that's kind of rare in toys, where like, oh, you know, maybe in the show looks amazing, and then when you get in real life, it's like there's some missing paint, or like it's more simplified. For the most part, the Build driver and the full bottles look almost identical to the ones on screen. Now I'm pretty sure the ones on screen are a lot bigger because they're made for like adults, and then these are made for kids and whatnot. But for the most part, they look pretty much identical. Now there are some negatives to the toys. Like, one is that I wish there was more sounds for the attacks, since all you really get is the Vortex finish and the Vortex attack, and it's always the generic one that you get for each. And in that case, the Build toys overall are pretty simple when compared to other Kamen Rider toys. I don't have any other Kamen Rider toys, but from what I've seen from the others, these ones are more simplistic than, like, for example, like the Gashads from X-Aid, or like the Pro Rise keys from 01, and then you got like all the Forze switches and all that, and it's like all these other crazy gimmicks and ideas. And Build is pretty much, for the most part, just shaking bottles, putting it in, you play the transformation sound, and that's pretty much it. The benefit of that is that you don't really lose any sounds when you get the cheaper, you know, Gachapons or Candy Toy versions. But then that also means you don't really get a lot in general with like the DX version and like that. But it's one of those things where for this toy, its simplicity is better, and I do really like it. I still really love Build, and I think the toys are really great in that. It's really satisfying to spin the crank, like I said earlier, and all that. And while there are some minor nitpicks I have with like how little sounds you actually get, I do love like the Legend Rider bottles that you put in, and it plays the sounds of the other Kamen Riders. I think that's really cool. And overall, I'm just really happy with the toys overall. And so, yeah, Kamen Rider is great. Yeah. Alright. I'll see you all next time. Bye.